Well, my name is Aaron Clark, so I'm a graduating senior here at the University of Utah and actually from the Salt Lake area.
My name is Barbara Ochoa. I am an undergraduate student here at the University of Utah, and I'll be graduating this May 2015.
Hi, my name is Danielle Wallace. I'm a student at the University of Utah. I'm a junior and I'll be graduating next spring.
So my name is Saya Langi. This is my 5th year up at the university.
My name is Mitchell Reber. I'm a student here at the University of Utah.
On my mom's side, they were Utah pioneers, really deep pioneer heritage. They came across the plains with Brigham Young, and they settled this entire area. According to, the narrative I've always been raised with is that they built up this area from nothing in the desert.
I want to say 3 great-grandfathers ago, maybe even 4. It was a long time ago. My grandfather, Ephraim K. Hanks, was part of helping the Martin Handcart Company make it to Utah. He provided food for the company. They were stuck out in the middle of winter in the cold, and he went and saved them. And he married Thisbe Reed, who was part of the company.
But yeah, my dad descended from pickets who came from England, and yes, I did cross the plains with the Mormon pioneers.
On the Reber side, it's a Swiss heritage, and they actually came to Utah after it had been settled for a few years, and they were part of the a Mormon group that came to settle southern Utah, so St. George specifically, in Santa Clara area.
My family doesn't identify as Native American. However, we come from the Quiche community in Guatemala, Chichicastenango. It is an indigenous community within that region, and we are very tied closely to those cultural practices.
And my grandparents came over from the island of Tonga back in the late 80s, early 90s. And they made a pit stop in Hawaii, stayed there for a couple years, and then came over to Salt Lake. One of the main reasons why my grandparents came to Utah or, to the mainland, obviously search for a better life, but I mean, the ties to the LDS Church. This place in Mormon religion, in the LDS religion, this is Zion. So, this is the place, this is like the promised land.
I remember going to This Is the Place monument all the time when I was a little girl with my grandparents. They used to take me on the weekends, and we used to go and hike up to This Is the Place monument up on the hill that says this is where Brigham Young decided to say this is where we're stopping as pioneers. And for me that was a big deal because, I had great aunts and great uncles who had died along the trail trying to get to the Salt Lake Valley. And so for them to be able to feel that peace, it was kind of almost a ceremonious occasion to go back every year and to celebrate our history.
I think I've heard of it briefly because I was told that there was a park near the zoo, and I was like, okay, but I never really had any context at all as to what the park was for, what did it mean by Heritage Park. It was really decontextualized because it was always referenced with the zoo, and so I wasn't sure its relation with the Hogo Zoo at all, so I had no idea whatsoever what it was.
I've been going there since I was a kid, but we didn't go there much, but when I did, I usually went with family. And I remember going with my grandma, actually, with my granny, my mom's mom. We just kind of walked around. We didn't go into the Heritage Park area because you had to pay. So we just stayed out in the, in the front, I guess you would call it, where the huge monument is. And we would just kind of go walk around and read the plaques, and it was just more of like pondering and kind of more like reverence, I want to say, just because it was kind of like these are ancestors. So it was, whenever I went up there, specifically with my granny, that's the feelings I felt. Like it was just kind of like remembering and reminiscing and that kind of stuff. So.
It was during Halloween, and they actually have a haunted house thing going on there, so I went there for that, so I had a completely different experience. I didn't even know the monument was there.
My parents dragged us along many, what we called our church family vacations, where we went and saw every church site that has ever existed or will exist. And one of the things I noticed from seeing all those different sites, Palmyra, New York, Nauvoo, Winter Quarters in Nebraska, even Council Bluffs, all these different places, and even as local as Temple Square, is that This Is the Place monument seemed very familiar to me, because it really was a similar setup to all these other church sites that I've seen.
I actually have relatives who lived in some of the houses that are now there, and they were there when I was a kid too. So we used to go see the cabins, and my parents would be like, or my grandma and my mom, she'd be like, "Oh yeah, this was your great 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 uncle who lived here, and he was a leader in the church, and they had spent years, and you know, now look at the valley." And that's kind of a cool thing about the actual land, is that you can turn and see the valley, and you can kind of see what has come of it, of their works.
Going there for the assignment definitely kind of forced me to not only take a more critical eye at how the narrative was being presented, but again, what was missing from it. And it was quite obvious that there was a strong rhetorical, Mormon pioneer narrative, but it was certainly missing, for the most part, any evidence of a true Native American narrative.
But I had no idea as to where to start. I had no idea that the narrative was going to be emphasizing a lot on the Mormon culture and the LDS religion as a whole. And so when I was going through each monument and each little statue, I had a lot of parallels with Temple Square, and I automatically associated it with Mormon culture because I've seen it before, especially as a tourist and as an incoming student to the state of Utah. Temple Square is generally the first place you go to visit when you come here, and so there was a lot of parallels between both sculptures, and so I automatically assumed that it was reflective of LDS history and not necessarily of Utah history.
Over the years, it's accreted different kinds of statues, so it's not really telling a completely coherent story. For example, when you look at the Mormon Battalion area, it kind of talks about this tension with the federal government that the Mormons had, while at the same time saying, aren't we, it felt like it was saying, like, we're Americans too because we did our part. So you had these kind of two conflicting narratives in the same spot, so that was kind of interesting.
But the one that stuck out to me more was Chief Washakie, because he was placed in the center between two pioneers and was described as a good Indian, was described as George Washington-like, and didn't give him the opportunity to share his own narrative.
They had a native village, but it was on the opposite side of the park, at the other end. And so to me, that spoke very loudly as well. Like, this is the physical representation of marginalizing a people. And then even going into the gift shop, that's probably one of the only other places that you would see or any kind of representation of natives. But of course, in that sense, it was the Indian, so Indian village toys, and authentic rugs and jewelry and stuff like that. When I went there, I was kind of really hesitant just because I grew up in, the LDS religion, and it's dear to my heart. But I know at the same time, we're not perfect, and, a lot of things happen, lots of genocide, lots of, just basically coming here and taking over. I knew that existed. So for me, it was about detangling those thoughts and emotions.
I felt responsible, and not responsible for the deeds of others, but personally responsible for not being aware and not wanting to know. Because there is a part of you that goes, I don't want to know this. I don't want to research this. I don't want to know about the Black Hawk Indian Wars. I want to think, Indians were friends with the little cowboys and everything was great. So I felt personally responsible. I felt that the land, no matter where I went, carried stories that I needed to know.
So I grew up in the LDS church, and then later on decided it wasn't for me at the age of 18, and I turned away. When I was visiting the monument for the assignment, I could feel this kind of tension within me, this inherent, I was looking at everything and kind of noticing all the settler colonial tones that we had studied, and the absence of native presence and all that stuff, and I could feel myself getting some righteous anger building up, and so I had caught myself and did a little bit of that rhetorical listening.
I was really uncomfortable. A lot of it has to do, I'm a huge advocate for people of color in general, and the moment I went, I was very visible in terms of, it was predominantly white. I went on a Sunday, I think it was, and so there were a lot of folks there that were that identified or may have aesthetically looked white or white passing. And so it was really uncomfortable because I felt like I was out of place. And especially with me identifying as indígena, like it was very difficult for me to place myself in that position, knowing that I may either A, have not been welcomed, I was not in church dress, and so it was very obvious that I was not a member of the church, and therefore othered even further being a person of color as a whole.
I went through serious identity crises, you know. I think no one wants to think that your family members, that your heritage that you're so proud in, that you take pride in, led to hurting so many people. That was a part of something much greater that maybe they didn't even understand. You know, you want to think that this land was here, that God did design it just for you. You know, it's how awesome does that feel? You know, and how sucky does it come to realize that no, this land was stolen, and that there's blood on it.
You go there and you recognize the complexity of the spot. It's a very complex story. Yes, there's kind of an erasure of Native presence there, and there's this kind of this push, this really hard push of like, you know, we suffered and we earned this. And it's true, they were exiled. They were exiled from where they were running away from persecution, but the kind of rub on that is they came here and they kind of pushed the people, they did the same thing essentially that they had the people back east had done to them. So it's a very, again, kind of conflicting and uneasy feeling that I get when I go over there.
It's really interesting to me. It's interesting to go to a place and have an experience of where you've had a preconceived notion about it. You've had an experience with it before, and have it become almost a different place. Because that's kind of what it seems to me now, is that it seems like a different place.
I still have pride, but it's just more of a it's just kind of like, I don't want to say let down, but it's just kind of like, well, it is what it is. And I mean, like I said, I'm always going to be connected to that. That's who I am, that's where I've come from.
I have more of a personal connection to it now than I did, you know, before. Even though I looked into that looking glass and had to kind of face my own preconceived notions and how it pertained to the academic theories I was learning and the religion that I grew up in. But at the same time, I can't discount the fact that this is a public space. This is the place, is a public monument, and that it's definitely missing other important narratives that need to be there to be a more inclusive place for everybody.
I am very bitter, but aside from that, I feel in reality I don't have much connection. I don't have the cultural background, so I had no context whatsoever. And even now, I still don't completely understand why it's so important and why it's so tied to the LDS culture.
I thought I would have some resentments toward it, and that was my biggest fear, because I didn't want to have resentments you know, towards anything. And so, but now I just, like, whenever I go there, whenever I see it, I'm just like, you know, like, take it with a grain of salt.
I don't know everything about these narratives. I probably might not ever know about them, but I'm more willing to listen. And the prejudices and the ideas and the narratives that had kept me from listening before are diminished a lot.
The kind of stories that the site to be telling, again, one of endured hardship and a kind of an earning, a justification of coming into the valley.
It's going back to the concept of settler colonialism, that where the victors write the history of the places they've conquered. You definitely see that at this place. You see a narrative that is predominantly about some three very specific themes, faith, family, and enduring hardship.
Very much my story, of my family, of my history, of my government, but not the story of the land that it's on, not the story of the place. I really wish they would change that name, because it's not the story of the place.